Hey everybody, welcome back. This is another segment we're doing of attorney advice, and we have Don Krupins with us, who is an attorney who works out of California, represents landlords and small business owners in the California area. And today we're going to be talking about the subject of discrimination when it comes to your rental properties. So Don, thanks for being on the show here.
Thanks, Eric. I appreciate it.
All right, let's get right to it.
In today's day and age, I mean, what we understand, certainly portrayed in the media, that we still have some legacy issues with discrimination in this country. Um, the federal government has been very progressive on trying to address some of those issues, going back to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. There's lots of federal legislation in place related to discrimination in housing. They've been around for 60 plus years now, and I think most of us, even just by way of common sense, realize that you can't have a minority or someone of a certain sexual orientation come to your apartment complex or to your single family dwelling and say that you want to rent, and they say, no, well, I'm not going to rent to you because you're African American or you're Latino or you're homosexual. Most of us just instinctually know that you can't do that.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of things that happen subtly that also can get you in as much trouble as being very overt about your discrimination. And I think one of the ways that is done is in the rental listing process.
Yeah.
If there's certain keywords that you would probably want to avoid, so as to not give the impression that you are discriminating against a particular group. So, for example, if I was renting a unit and I really wanted, maybe an elderly couple, someone who's going to be there for long term, I would not.
Not too elderly then.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Sorry, can't help myself sometimes.
So, or conversely, I didn't want an elderly couple in there. I think you could start running afoul if you put something in your ad only looking for tenants over or under such and such age. Age is a protected class.
Sure.
Even though it's not in an attempt to discriminate, there's this concept in the law that even though it's not intentional, if the result is discrimination, it's still the same offense as if it's intentional. And you put an ad suggesting you only want tenants under 20. Maybe you're a guy and you only want female tenants in your duplex under 25 years old. You could find yourself having a complaint with the federal housing authorities.
Sure.
for discriminating against elderly folks.
Well, I feel like too, especially if it's in your listing. I mean, it's out there. If somebody's taking a screenshot of it, it's there. It's evidence.
Oh yeah.
And not that I'm trying to say like here's how you should discriminate, but that's like one of the worst ways to do it because when you're doing that, you're just. I mean, it's hard to argue that you're discriminating in that instance.
Yeah, and I think the hard part, and I don't know that this really resonated with me until I went to law school. People will sit back and say, but that's not why I'm doing it. I think the message, at least insofar as advertising goes, is you need to kind of step back and look at what the impact might be on the population of tenants that you're trying to secure or dissuade, even not be intentionally, from pursuing a rental with you. So advertising is one of them. Kind of some of the more nefarious things, you have a prospective tenant that shows up and maybe they have small children and you just have an aversion to small children. Most folks are not going to come out and say, well, we don't allow small children. But what you're going to probably do, or what some landlords will do, is they'll show them the worst property available, or the worst unit available. And then you have a desirable client that comes in and you show them the best unit available. It's going to be hard for an individual tenant to know, but I know in large complexes, landlords get a reputation and that information travels, particularly in today's day and age with social media. You don't want to get the reputation of being the landlord that always shows the crappy unit to maybe a less desirable tenant, because all of that pattern demonstrates an intention to discriminate. So it's a subtle but subversive way of discriminating.
So one of the topics that comes up a lot in the group, and I know I'm kind of springing this on you, but
Sure.
We see a lot about Mrs. Murphy's Law. So from my understanding, that is, as long as your local area doesn't supersede that law, is that if you live in an owner-occupied unit and it's maybe like 4 units or less, that you have a little bit more leniency on who you can accept and deny into your rental. Can you give me a little bit more background information of how that works?
Sure. So the federal government, the federal discrimination statute has exceptions, which is it's hard to believe, that allows you to discriminate.
Yeah, that
For
is
lack
weird.
of a better word. So if it's a single family dwelling or an owner occupied, if it's a single family dwelling, an owner occupied dwelling, or a multifamily dwelling, and I believe the cutoff is 4, as you suggest,
Hmm.
then those discrimination laws at the federal level don't apply.
Okay.
I know that California is almost lockstep with respect to state law and federal law. So even though you may be able to overcome the federal hurdle, I would be extremely cautious of an underlying state law that might prohibit that type of behavior.
Yeah.
And the other thing too that I would caution folks on, and again, it's more prevalent today than ever. And it goes back to what we spoke about earlier. Just be a good person,
Hmm.
be a good steward, be fair. I think in the long run, those things pay dividends. I understand that there are undesirable tenants out there. Whatever your process is going to be to weed out undesirable tenants, make sure it's consistent, because that's where people get in trouble, is when they don't apply things consistently.
Yeah, and one of the things we tell people too is if you have a standard like written tenant screening criteria and it's something that you use consistently every time you're screening for that unit, and you should have one of those set up for every single rental that you have, because it may
Right.
vary depending. You may ask for a higher credit score at this rental because it's a luxury rental compared to your
Sure,
other one.
sure.
But if you have that and you make people even aware of it, which I believe in some states, because Texas, I believe you need to make people aware of that before you actually screen them. That's something that can help you out too, because then not only is it something you can point to if you do get accused of discrimination, it's also going to help you, because sometimes it's hard to understand when you are discriminating, because it can be something that's so subtle. So if you stick to a process, that's very helpful.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I could not agree with you more. Consistent process, irrespective of who the potential tenants are, it can be a lifesaver.
Yeah. What would you say to a landlord? Because I know this day and age, that saying's always overused, this day and age, but
Yeah, right.
it's so easy to get access to things, and it's easy to file a discrimination claim, because I've gone on the website and seen it. It's just you got to fill out a little bit of information and then they follow up. It's not like somebody's got to go down to the courthouse and like find a judge or something like that.
Yep.
If you're a landlord or a property manager and you get a discrimination claim against you, what would you say you would do in that situation?
Hopefully, you have laid the groundwork as part of a good process, going back to what you spoke of just a bit ago, Eric, and that is making sure that from the outset of the engagement, whether the person became a tenant or not, you have all of your documentation in place. The next thing you want to do is go ahead and gather all that documentation, gather all of your evidence. And it's much like going to small claims court. You want to have a nice, persuasive, concise, professional-looking piece. And I don't mean by laminated and
Sure.
color coded and things like that. The other thing too, where folks run into trouble is not responding timely. So you're going to get a notice. You're going to get a period in which to respond. Make sure you respond timely.
Sure.
And then also too, I would do a little self-reflection, to be honest with you.
Okay.
It's easy when money is at stake and you feel that your livelihood is at stake. When someone makes an allegation against you, that may be detrimental to that livelihood. But it's been my experience that if you can get people to self-reflect and sit back and really kind of understand the root of things, it's rare in my experience that someone would make an allegation like that completely out of nowhere. So there's probably some foundation, whether it's a legitimate foundation or not.
Yeah.
But kind of reflect back. And then the other thing too is I think you have to weigh weigh the risk of the consequences against what the allegation is to kind of figure out how to proceed. That's the tricky part is making sure you understand clearly what the allegation was. Again, that self-reflection piece, and look at how you may have contributed or may not have contributed, and then figure out what evidence you might need to support or refute it.
Yeah, and if all of this isn't enough for somebody who's listening to this and thinking about becoming a landlord or a property manager, I mean, I don't know off the top of my head, but I believe the federal fines and the costs are like over $50,000 for first-time offenders now. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, they can be astronomical.
Yeah.
And it also raises a point too, and I don't want to, as an attorney, I don't want this to sound self-serving, but
Sure.
At some point, it is recommended that you bring in some professional help.
Mm-hmm.
And there's lots of really qualified attorneys throughout the country that can help. If you're ever uncertain or you don't know where to turn, I know the board probably has recommendations throughout the United States, but I also reach out to your local bar association because they're a great resource.
All right, perfect. Well, I can't thank you enough for talking about this topic, because it is something that kind of comes up in the group, and I feel like it's also one of those things. It's like this weird conversation to navigate for people sometimes, and sometimes it can be kind of frustrating to a landlord because they just want to rent to who they think the best person is. But you got to do it in a process and a system that's not discriminating, and you want to make sure you're documenting your process and you're always, dotting all your I's and crossing your T's. So.
Yeah, absolutely. If you follow those steps that you just outlined, Eric, I think it would be a stretch to say that a landlord would find themselves in trouble.
All right. Thanks, Don.
Thank you.